Hey everyone, it's Pitico from Rock Daydream Nation, and I've got back to the channel Aussie rock legend, Angry Anderson. How's it going, mate?
Yeah. Well, it's going as well as possible. And I said that because it's a sad indictment. When you say sad, I mean it's an indictment about when you're at a certain age, etc. I've got several. I spoke to someone only 2 days ago in the morning walking the dog about, and she was telling me about how she just recently lost her father, and we were talking about that, and yeah, it's kind of like you get to a certain stage where you've got to accept loss as a natural course of events because age has got something to do with it. And in recent years, I've had a few medical episodes which were the result of age. I've dealt with them and I'm okay. But yeah, I mean, it's an acknowledgement. Well, you're at this at this time of life. And in the case of a couple of people I know that are succumbing to cancer, you see, that started years ago too. Because these things just start very subtly. And, I recently had surgery and had a clot. So this is a good segue into reminding you, go and have a scan, ask your GP and say, listen, I want to have a scan to see if they've got any potential serious blockages in arteries, etc. Because when they happen, if they happen too late, you have a stroke, which is a fucking real rude way of waking up to the fact that you've got a medical condition which is really serious.
Yeah.
And I mean, or you can have a heart attack, So
yeah,
the thing about it is, and I'm serious, go and
yep.
have I mean, apart from getting your prostate checked regularly, after because I asked my surgeon when I had this clot taken out of my neck, and that was life-threatening, because they thought I'd had a stroke, albeit a mini stroke. But it turns out now, 2 scans later, there's no evidence. The early stuff was evidence of I had all the symptoms. But what I said to the surgeon after the operation to get this thing out, I said, how long ago in my life would this have started? And he said, well, take into consideration your lifestyle, blah, 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 and he said, probably in your 30s. And that's when these clots start, that's a build-up of stuff that the body can't get rid of, and, lack of exercise, bad diet, whatever it might be, the thing that, so I've sort of turned a corner, if you like. I'm re-embracing the health aspects of my life, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. Well, emotionally, stroke spiritually, because life is finite.
Absolutely. So much has been happening with Rose Tattoo. You're a busy man because you did a tour of New Zealand, you supported Buck Cherry, and in the last couple of days, it's popped up on my social media feed that you're doing this whiz-bang tour with George Farragut and ZZ Top. A lot of days. That's a bit of excitement. That's pretty good.
Yes, it is. And it's exciting for us in a personal sense because our relationship with George Thorogood has always been through his band, and they play gigs in Sydney, or they play gigs wherever they play gigs, like right around the country. But when they're not working with George on their nights off, they book gigs for themselves or have their gigs booked. And they play in their own right under their name, got a separate band name. And so we've gone along a few times and jammed with them and stuff, and or just to watch the band. Yeah, so there's a nice connection there, but the connection with ZZ Top goes back to the very early 80s when we first were establishing ourselves out of Britain into Europe, whereas after a few years we centered ourselves in Europe as opposed to Britain or UK. And yeah, one of the first major tours we did was with the Top through Europe on their comeback. Well, they called it their comeback. They hadn't played for quite a few years, and we've had a great relationship with them ever since. So we're very, as close as you can be to a band that you don't see for many years, and live in two entirely different continents. But yeah, we've got quite a warm working relationship, and there's a great amount of respect and mutual respect. Obviously, I think ZZ Top is one of the great rock and roll bands in the sense that they actually do play rock and roll. And it was a relationship built out of, and very flattered to say, out of mutual admiration and respect. The boys in the band have always acknowledged that we're, Tatts are one of their favourite acts to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a couple of questions I didn't ask last time. So, you joined Rose Tattoo in 1976.
I actually joined the year before.
75. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you actually remember that first rehearsal? Do you remember?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Did you feel like there was a chemistry and, this is going to be really good?
Absolutely. From the very opening moments, actually, there was a very colourful identity around Sydney in those days, and he was colourfully connected to certain aspects of the business, so to speak. He was a supplier of exotic substances. He ended up actually managing a couple of bands. One of them actually, where Swanee was in, when Swanee joined Feather. Yes. And Stuart Fraser was the young prodigy, young brilliant guitar player. He went on to play with Barnum, I think, many years. No, Noiseworks. What am I saying? Barnum. Noiseworks. I was thinking Barnum, Johnny Stevens, but he was a founding member of Stuart Fraser. But anyway, this guy, Ray, we were up in, Mick and I were up in Sydney looking for players for Buster Brown. And Ray said to me, I was well acquainted with him from the Buster Brown days, the early Buster Brown days. And he said, look, there's a couple of guys that he said there's a bunch of guys that are trying to form the same kind of band you're talking about, like the new incarnation that I envisaged for Buster. And he said, I'll take you along to meet them. And I said, yeah, okay, fine. So we went along and it was at Ian Ryland's house. He had it was on a sloping block. And so when you walk around the back, it was raised up, and you could walk in underneath, and he'd hung carpets and mattresses he's put up against the wall, and created this little sort of like a jam space. And so there was him, it was Ian and Peter, a guitar player, and a bass player, a drummer, sorry, and Mick was just there as my pal, so he sort of sat and they said, oh, like, what do you know? And we said, well, we jammed just classics, and I think I sort of won points with Peter because, as Peter has revealed particularly in the early years, he didn't see me as the singer. He wanted someone a bit more pop orientated and someone with a bit more sort of flash and dash, so to speak. And plus the fact that he said later in talking about those days, he said, all I'd ever heard about Angry was not good. It was bad. Like he was a troublemaker, and he was, blah blah blah. Which I thought was kind of funny because the drummer that they had then and the other guitar player were both using heroin and and were very unreliable. But anyway, getting back to your original question, yes, we started jamming. And about today, I think I won some points with Peter because I said, well, do you know any sort of like early Eddie Cochran? And of course, his eyes lit up. And so we did things like 20 Flight Rock and hey, look at this, and here she come, bam, bam, here come that girl again. Well, that kind of stuff. And we did some early Stones stuff like Street Fighting Man and Jumpin' Jack Flash and just stuff, like some Eric Burdon and the Animals and things that I knew that I'd mention them and I could tell it was hitting the right note.
Yep. Yeah.
And Rylands, of course, another Leo. Rylands was he was the reason I got the gig in the end because he pushed very much for me to be in the band. Because he wanted the band to be more hard edged, which was an interesting combination because him and like Peter's idea was like he said, I want the band to sort of look like Sweet. And I thought, I'm in the wrong fucking place here, like because what Sweet look like. He said, but I want the band to look really cool, but have a hard edge. And it was his obsession, I think, with the two opposites, So like, that's why he chose the name Rose Tattoo, because the rose is infinitely feminine and Tatts were traditionally masculine. And he chose the title from it's a novel. It's one of those American trashy, like white trash type. Just trying to think of the author. But yeah, there was a movie made called The Rose Tattoo, but it's from a book.
Yes. Yep.
You think of the author?
No, but I'll put it down on the comments. But,
but this person, this author, because I asked him, because I thought it was such a fucking mate, I thought, Jesus, what a great name for a band, and I mean, obviously the Rose Tattoo didn't stick; it just became Rose Tattoo.
Just get rid of the.
Yeah, I think
it Rose Tattoo. Yeah,
I think that was just a natural evolution. I think away from the Rose Tattoo, it just became Rose Tattoo, which is a more of a statement, But yeah, so that early, and they said, look, how long are you in town? And I said, I'm here for a couple of weeks or, until the money runs out, whatever. We're sleeping on couches and all that kind of shit. And quite really, I mean, quite, legitimately. And, well, come back and have it. Like Ian was all over it, and
he was super keen.
Yeah,
to have you there.
absolutely. And so was the guitar player and the drummer. You know, and Pete, being Pete, God rest his soul, Pete. He just was stood in the background and sort of looked. You know, he was the great observer. Um, was our Pete, and like to keep everything, you know, close to him. Like he never overstated or never let too much go. In all the years that I knew him, I mean, there were times when, which was quite remarkable. There were times when he smoked marijuana or drank red wine, and this is everyone that knows Pete like intimately. We all laugh about those times because he turned into another. He just relaxed completely, and there were some nights where he and I were, for one reason or another, turn. You know, we would be together. Like long after a gig, and he wanted company, and so I sort of stayed with him, and we just talked for hours and hours, and he disclosed a lot of stuff to me about, you know, his personal life for a start, and because that was always very complicated. But yeah, that's another story, anyway, which can't, you know, be told. I mean, it's kind of like way too personal, but
it's in the vault. Yeah.
It's in the vault, and it'll stay there as far as I'm concerned. I mean,
yeah,
I'm actually working with a writer now to do a book on me, and you know, I did say right from the outset, I said there are some stories that shouldn't be told.
Yes.
And there's some that can't be, for, you know, because my kids are still alive. I mean, but apart from the fact that there's other people too, and you have a responsibility to them as much as you to yourself. But yeah, from day nine, to answer your question, sorry. Yeah, I knew from the very first. Yeah, we probably played for like an hour. Like we'd finish the song, and there was a lot of jamming and stuff went on, which was really cool because I remember Ian saying to me later, he said, you know, like I love the way we can just jam, and it was mostly just letting Pete solo, and even Rylands was great at taking the music somewhere. You know, like he'd start playing something and then he'd play a variation, and then Pete would pick up on it and go with it. But,
did any of the jams end up on this album?
No, actually, you know what? Since like now, of course, I mean, like they're just instrumental things, but like when we play Bad Boy or Outlaw or one of the boys every now and again, Wally, Nice Boys, obviously. I let the band. There's sections where we drop it back or we keep it going, and you just let the band breathe. You know, you just let the band, because they've hit a stride already very early on in the song, and you just think like, wow, there's such an energy here and such fluidity. You don't want to ever waste that. So it's kind of like, you know, you're riding a horse and you can feel that the horse just is in this great rhythmic thing, and you know, like, because when you ride, you can restrain that energy, you know, with rein control. And then there's times when you just think like no, so you let it, you loosen your grip, so to speak, and you just let it go for its own. And so yeah, that was. But from the very early I came back a day or two later, and the guitar player hadn't turned up, or didn't turn up. And it was at the second or third jam within a week or so. And Mick had his guitar with him. And they said, oh, well, you know, blah, blah, blah's not here. And Mick said, well, I can sit in. So Mick sat in, and he was so, well, he was very different as a player, but it stepped up again. And you know, it was just one of those magical moments where you just thought, he didn't immediately get the job. They weren't looking for a guitar player because they had one. You know, in fact, they were looking at a few different players. As it turned out, there was another guy from one of the Buffalo lineups that they were thinking about using. There was a guy that Ian had played with, a guy called Norm Rowe, who was another slide player. He was a great player, really good rhythm player. And I think Pete was looking at having two similar, because I said to, you know, like when they said, well, you know, we want to play with Norm Rowe, and I said, well, but, you know, like, because he was one of my favourite guitar players, and I'd seen him play with Band of Light when I'd seen Rylands play, but didn't know Ian then. You know, I just knew him as the bass player in the band. And I said, well, two slide players. He said, yeah, but, you know, he plays conventional guitar, and he's a great solo player, very melodic, beautiful melodic solo player. And so that would have been a very interesting combination. But anyway, Mick sat in, and then we went back to Melbourne, and sometime later, and I'm pretty sure it was like anything from 3 or 4, like 2 or 3 months at least. My memory's not great, but Rylands kept in touch with us, you know, with me and Mick, and said, "Are you coming back?" And you know, because he was pushing for it, you know.
Yeah.
So we made an effort. We came back. We got together some money, and we came up, and with the idea that I was going to audition yet again, because Ian had made up his mind, but he couldn't convince Pete.
Right.
But the band fell apart because of the others. As I said, you know, they were addicted to heroin and
substance abuse.
Yeah.
So you eventually you're in the band, and rumor has it that the first gig of Rosie Tatts was at New Year's Eve at Checkers 1976.
It wasn't the first gig.
Okay. So for the record, what was the first gig, your recollection?
The first gig was at Coogee. It wasn't Selena's, Coogee Bay Hotel. Donnie Sutherland was either part owner or had some sort of, but there was another pub up the south end and up on the hill.
Palace Hotel?
Oh, I can't remember. But the room had a different name for the pub, and it was called the something room, right? And Donnie was putting a lot of young bands on, and he knew he knew of Buster because we'd been on his show, but more so Peter and Ian. And so when we were wanting to play live to, you know, I suppose test the water That's the only way I can put it, because we weren't ready at that point to launch the band. We were just had our toe in the water, so to speak. And so we did a few nights at that pub. And then this other guy, the guy that got me the job, that took me to the first meeting with Peter and Ian, Ray Arnold was his name. He's gone now, so I'm not giving anything up. But he was a real lad, was our Ray. Much loved man about town. Talking about man about town, he's one of the lads that inspired that song. There was a bunch of them. One of them was our first manager, Mickey Christian. And they were the old school, you know, they were hard guys, really hard guys, but they were beautiful human beings. And we played a couple of gigs at Donny's place, and then Ray said, how would you like to do, like, I think it was part of their licensing, but the Tuesdays and Wednesday nights and Thursday, Friday nights at Checkers, they were for the name acts. But you can do a few sets, you know, so in other words, to get experience on a stage in front of an audience. So we started playing at, this is 1975, we started playing at Checkers. And what happened was, the birthday thing, right? So we'd done I don't know, let's call it a half a dozen gigs before we got to Checkers. But we moved our way up. We became favourite with the clientele, or a favourite with the clientele at Checkers, right? So Checkers has always been, I mean, it's got wonderful history. I mean, some really big artists performed there, and visiting overseas people, Frank Sinatra, etc. I mean, would go there and drink, and and they were. It was a club of colourful people. That was the main clientele. Yeah. So they were big spenders, and anyway, the club was very well thought of, and so we quickly moved up. So Mr. Casey, he was the sort of the maitre d', if you like, and he said, "Look, we really like you to play because we're going to have this colourful clientele for New Year's. We'd like you to play New Year's if you wouldn't mind." And so he said, "Yeah." So we played 5 sets.
5. Wow.
5 sets. We had 2 different sets. They were 30 to 40 minutes in duration. And we just played one, and then we'd play the next one, and then we'd play the first one again, and then we'd play the second one again, and then we'd play. And we went on. We went on in 75, and
finished in 76.
Well, we stopped the set right in the middle.
Yep.
Right, stop. 5 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever. We stopped right in the middle, which you don't like doing, but those were those days, and so we were still on stage. Some chick came up and sang "Old Lang Syne," and there was all that shit going on, and and it was like, "Righto, boys," so boom, 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 off we go again. So we went on in 75, came off in 76, and Pete said, "We are officially a band." So finally, that's what we've always taken our birthday from midnight, which appealed to his quirky romantic sense of stuff.
Absolutely. And the crowds were really getting into you at Checkers. So,
We
they
were. I
really
mean,
grooving on it.
because apart from, see, the thing was, that's the thing that I thought about years later. a lot of those old hardcore colorful people, they grew up, like rock and roll was their music. Later on, of course, AC/DC played there, the Angels played there, there's a whole lots of other bands. But they related to the rock and roll. They related to, the 50s and 60s rock and roll music, which they all grown up on,
Yep.
And so we were, and the other thing too, of course, was that, it was the Buffy boy image thing. They loved the fact, because, most of them, if not all, I don't know, never really went into it because, but a lot of them were, had done time in jail, obviously, and so they received tattoos in jail, or they had tattoos when they were kids. So the whole thing about the band was appealing to them. Like they finally had in front of them a band that they could relate to on all those levels. Like we sort of didn't look like any other band, but we looked like them. If you know what I mean, like. Even though they all, in those days, they all wore suits and shit,
Well, you definitely weren't Sherbet, were you?
No, exactly right. Yeah. So, we appealed on all levels.
Yeah.
And we quickly became, like, I can remember, where the band would finish, like, all in between sets. And you'd go into the bar because, they encourage us to socialise. And you'd be standing beside or having drinks bought for you by some of the most notorious people in Sydney. And it was kind of like, you just after the initial, like, wow, that's, or that's, all of a sudden they're, come on, mate, fucking let me buy you a drink, like, yeah. So we've always had that. To this day, we've always had that association and that connection with, those colourful characters.
Flamboyant and colourful characters.
Flamboyant, some of them were.
Yeah. Welcome to Sydney in 1975, 76. It was a different time, wasn't it?
Well, see, they'd all established themselves in the late 50s through the 60s, as the people who ran the show.
Yeah.
Whether they were, front line, or whether the people that stood back, that weren't in the newspapers or weren't.
Yeah.
So
I think they would be described in the UK, because we've got UK viewers, wide boys, probably the, like the Craze, I think the Craze were really,
Yeah, exactly.
That sort of.
Yeah, the lads, the
lads,
the boys around town, they were, some of them were real flashy dudes, like, dressing wise, and they had plenty of money. They always had plenty of money, and I mean, some of the women that went to Checkers were just extraordinary, because they were all there to try and snag one. It's kind of like take that sort of footy wag thing and amplify it by about 20 times. But there were some stunning women that were there, attracted by those blokes and trying to get their way in.
Yep.
And the good thing about it was, at the end of the night, if they hadn't picked up on anyone, I mean, we were sort of the last choice, but who cared,
Absolutely. Angry, on my channel, we do a lot of series on Australian rock albums, and we did a show about Aussie albums you got to hear before you die. And I can tell you the response from viewers was, this album is like the essential album that you've got to have in your collection if you're a fan of Aussie rock. Angry, why is this album so timeless? What do you think in particular, that Rosie Tatts album, it seems to, touch so many people.
I think there's several components with any, and one ingredient component, if you like, which cannot be denied, is your introduction. It's like when you meet someone, you get a first impression. You either like them or you don't like them. Pardon me. Compared to other albums around at the time, and the only other band recording that even comes close in an essence was AC/DC. And as you know, our stories are intertwined, particularly in those days. If it hadn't been for them, we would never have been signed to Elvis. And I think I did mention this to you once before, that major labels in those days were looking for the next thing. So whenever there was a gig, representatives, that the people from the record companies would go to the gigs and see everybody that played, anybody and everybody, in an effort to sign them first, right? And they just, no one wanted to sign the Tatts. And if it hadn't have been for Malcolm and well, Phil was a connection, because of us playing together in Buster. But Malcolm and he came along. Then Angus came along, and then obviously they came along as a band. In fact, and I think I've told you this before, those guys were the only guys that we invited up to if they wanted to get up and have a jam with the band, and they're the only ones that we were interested in. So, like I say, I think the thing was, there were so many people, without realizing it, not even themselves, they were waiting for something. And I think that's the reason why the Tatts has always had not the broader, greater acceptance from mainstream. It's always been clearly defined. It's always been what they call a cult following or a niche, because there's a certain amount of people that as soon as they saw the band, as soon as they heard that song, those songs that are on that album, there was an instant identification, because they went, yeah, okay, that's me.
And a lot of those songs, were they based on real events and real people? Like, is there a real Astra Wally? There was a real Butcher and Fast Eddie?
Yep. Well, Wally was a drug dealer that operated, where in those early days, we used to hang at the Astra Hotel, one of the few hotels where rock bands or people who played in rock bands all congregated. And because back in those days, Bondi was a much different place than it is now. I mean, I wouldn't be comfortable down there any longer. Wouldn't have been for a long time. But in those days, it was part of our territory, part of our turf, so to speak. Because there was a lot of there was. I mean, Jigger and Geordie actually. I used to crash there, in their rooms, but they actually used to live there in the early days.
The infamous Bondi Lifesavers. That was like one of your watering holes, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That was another rock venue. But Astra Wally was a drug dealer who I don't think he was not that bright, because he was addicted to his own product, but he wronged the wrong people. and disappeared. So Rylance wrote predominantly, that lyric. So yes, that's his name wasn't Wally, but he was there's an old English saying, you don't be a Wally.
Yeah.
So I think that's why Ian chose Astra Wally. But Butcher and Fast Eddie was a song I wrote. I wrote the notes for it in Buster, and it was about gang warfare in Melbourne between the precursor to skinheads was sharps. And they started in the 60s, and it was a peculiarly Melbourne thing. And then it moved for some reason, I don't know why, but moved to Adelaide, and then eventually moved to Sydney. And then by the 70s, of course, there was the skinhead influence from. So the two cultures grew up simultaneously to one another in a sense, one in Britain and one in. When you say Australia, I mean, it started in Melbourne, definitely started in Melbourne in the mid to late 60s. Anyway, there was when you get gangs of those proportions where there's hundreds of members, like we had the Pascoe Vale boys, which, I grew up in Pascoe Vale, and there was the Coburg boys, there was the Brunswick boys, there was the Glenroy boys, there was the Broadmeadows boys, there was blah, blah, blah. So every suburb had its own gang, and there was a lot of rivalry, which is why there was so much violence in those days. But yeah, it was all physical, like fisticuffs sort of stuff. And it spread all the way down across the river on the other side of the city, going down to Frankston. Anyway, the two main antagonists were, there was a guy, actually he's passed now, but he grew up in Faulkner, and his nickname was the Butcher. But Mick came up with the Fast Eddie because we didn't know who the other guy was, didn't even know what his name was. No one seemed to.
But it sounds good. It sounds like a good name, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. No, it just fitted. Yeah.
Fitted, yeah. With Rose Tattoo, you're one of the few bands that kind of made an impact with that pub rock sound, or the Aussie sound, because you can't deny that those first three albums, it's distinctly Australian. Why do you think that you succeeded in the UK and pockets of America, where as bands like Cold Chisel, Skyhawks, Sherbet didn't?
I don't know. I think, I mean, you'll never know the definitive answer, but I think it's because we played the blues. I think going back to our association with ZZ Top, one of the reasons they picked us was because we were building. We were a big draw card in Europe when they first came over with that album. In America, I don't know. I think there's a couple of things, and I think the same reason happened in Europe, well, UK, then Europe, and then of course a couple of years later, America, was that they'd never seen anything like it before. There just wasn't a fully tattooed, like every member of the band was tattooed, and we had that. We took that sort of bad boy image, which had only been just sort of flirted with. We took it to, like, not just another level, but several levels up. Because I mean, if you looked at us, I mean, you look at the cover of Assault and Battery. I mean, who calls an album Assault and Battery? And again, written, Assault and Battery was written about a real occurrence. It really happened. There was this a couple of guys, and they were walking home after a night out and heard this chick screaming, and they've come across this, there was this group of blokes, and yeah, so he just decided to fucking defend her, like save her, which is, and in the in having to do that, he had to seriously injure, a couple. Anyway, that's another story altogether. But I think it was just that. I think with America, particularly America, I think with they broke AC/DC. I think when we first got to Britain, they'd already cleared the way, so to speak. There was Bon, who had this, very sexy. He had a couple of tattoos, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like the ugly cousins arrive, who fuck every barbecue or 21st or wedding, those kind of people. And they, having seen AC/DC and having gone through that sort of flirtation that, with the Stones and the Beatles, Beatles are supposed to be the clean cut, Stones are grubby, almost bad boy type image, and there's drugs involved and all this kind of shit. And then along comes a band like Rose Tattoo that plays traditional rock and roll, which I think has always been, and it's, whether it's 100% accurate or not, I think it's always been the key.
Yeah.
It just it swings. It's a groove. There's not a human being born that can't relate to that.
Do you think a lot of these Aussie bands that didn't succeed is because they didn't relocate like you guys did? Like In Excess, for example, they basically relocated to America and toured. You did the same. Do you think that was a mistake with a lot of bands that just went over there, flirtated, and then just wanted to base themselves in Australia?
I think that's just my personal opinion. I think that's got merit. In fact, in my view, I think you're spot on. I think there's more to it than that. Like you mentioned, Skyhawks. It's kind of like they invented glam over there. So when an Australian band comes over whose take on pop is quite quirky, but the glam thing is like, well, we've already seen that.
Selling ice to the Eskimos type thing?
Pretty much, I think. Yeah. I wasn't going to be that harsh, but I think, it's kind of, like some of the glam bands that we saw when we first went to America were extraordinary. Like they were, good rock and roll bands, or rock, more so. But as glam outfits, I mean, you got to remember the early Guns N' Roses, before they'd gone completely, bad boy. There was a lot of teased hair and, girly type clothing. But look at Aerosmith, one of the greatest rock and roll bands around ever. And they had they were good because they didn't, it wasn't totally glam. It was more about Stephen and about, because he was the most flamboyant dressed. But the others never went glam. But I think, getting back to Skyhawks, I think that's possibly what, I don't know. I don't think they were musically that understood, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because
maybe some bad tours. They did some pretty weird tours, like with bands like Uriah Heep and Foghat. I mean, I can't imagine those audiences would have got Skyhawks in the deep south. You know what I mean?
I don't think they got it, and I think it was a bit early for camp, or even though there was camp around. I mean, Gary Glitter, but Shirley was a different kind of camp. I don't know. Their music is on a par with anything as far as classic pop. I thought, talking about Chisel, actually, I'm going to see him tonight.
So am I. So there you go. Why didn't they make it in?
I don't know.
That's a head scratch, isn't it?
But Jim's, I remember him saying years ago that, again, they could have been with the wrong record company, or they didn't know how to handle it, didn't know where to place them. Because, I mean, I even remember talking to the guys out of AC/DC, and they went out on some not quite as strange as the Skyhawks going out with Uriah Heep. I mean, but there was some very missed opportunities through matched outings. I think we were always lucky. We never went on a mixed match bill with anyone ever.
Had the right.
We went. Oh no! Oh contraire! Oh contraire! Yeah. One of the worst experiences we ever had. And again, it was a record company decision. They wanted some rock and roll opening acts, and Black Feather were on it. Not Black. It was a Black Feather. They were sort of like American Indians playing in a band. They were on the bill. We were on the bill, and there was another band. Escapes me, and it was a like a concert touring party. They weren't called festivals in those days, but there was like 4 bands on most nights. But it was Boston and Foreigner.
Yeah, well, that's the same thing that happened at Chisel, wasn't it? They were on a opening for REO Speedwagon and Journey or something, and that's where we've had enough. They almost broke up the band. So,
well, see, I don't get it, because I think Don Walker has probably written some of the greatest songs for me. I mean, there was other contributors too. Obviously, Steve Pretwich wrote a beautiful couple of really amazing songs, big singles.
But they're all. What band in Australia, Angry, where you have 5 folk write songs? I'm scratching my head to think of anybody internationally, like the band maybe, but there's not that many that you can think. Like, I was looking at East, and all of them have chipped in with a song. It's just
yeah. To this day, there's got to be more to it than meets the eye. I think when you're in a band, it's difficult to see past that. It's only years later you can look back in reflection, in retrospect, so to speak. I thought they had the songs. I thought they had everything going for them to compete in that melodic pop, power pop, if you like.
Well, you played a few festivals that haven't been too shabby, like Wacken and Breeding and a few. But one question I want to ask you, like with record companies, there's been a whole history of record companies screwing their artists and interfering, artistically interfering.
They couldn't help themselves.
Has Rose Tatts ever had stoushes with record companies, like interfering?
Yeah. We were on a sub label out of Atlantic, and the guy Jerry Goldstein, or like that name, like that, Jerry, he got it, and he signed us. And it's like we turned up. Peter and I went over there for a week to do press and stuff. And, so we'd been there a couple of days and we met, it was in the boardroom. We met everyone and blah, 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 blah. And one of the PR ladies, she was very excited. And she said, you got no idea. She said it was so hard trying to find someone that, an airbrush person who was actually a tattooist to put your tattoos on. And we sort of, thought, what the fuck? This is just to illustrate how we were just, and we said, we don't put them on. They're on.
We're the real deal.
They're tattoos, right? They're there.
Yeah.
And she was like gobsmacked. She went, "Oh my God, really?" And we said, yeah, everyone in the band has real ink. So you don't need. So what I'm saying was that there was an initial groundswell, or ground support from Jerry and a couple of others who got it. He thought and I remember them being quite honest, and they're saying when we first got there, said we're gonna have to be very careful about how we promote and sell the band. And I think that's going back to that support thing through America. We went out with ZZ Top, but we had a history with them from Europe. We went out with Pat Travis. We went out with ZZ Top, of course, and Aerosmith. And they had us lined up. There was even talk about us at one stage, if we'd gone back, about going out with people like Bob Seger and rock and roll bands. So they knew that placing us with the right as opener, to the right act was the right way to go. So we never had any problem in that. We did have. I remember there was one suggestion that on the next album that we try and write a couple of ballads, and I remember one guy from the company, and they were just all trying to be helpful. I mean, they obviously want you to work. They want it to work. And he said, "Have you ever thought about adding a keyboard player?" And which was kind of curious, because I remember very, very much talking to Pete later on about it, and he said, I'd love to have keyboards in the band, because they were smart enough to. He said, you can have a keyboard player, but have keyboard parts on the album, but that doesn't necessarily. He said we wouldn't put the keyboard player on stage.
Right.
He would be a back player, off to the side, or just to add the because what they were talking about was making it a broader appeal. Because one of the things that they, you wouldn't have to be a fucking rocket scientist to work this out, but the original Rose Tattoo, which they were all having to deal with, was not mainstream appeal. And both in the UK and Europe, and they wanted you to have that appeal across the board, So somehow, without losing the authenticity or the essence of it, they particularly in America, and the where they kept coming back to, they said, the AC/DC had the novelty of Angus, which softened the whole, it wasn't buffy, thuggy, in your face sort of masculinity.
Yep.
not that he's effeminate or anything, but I mean, his act, the schoolboy turning around on the ground and all that kind of stuff. That was such a novelty, and it was quirky, and it worked. And then you've got this, sexy sort of like female appealing front guy who was a rock singer. He was a rock and roll singer. So you got sort of the best of both worlds there. Whereas with the Tatts, you never got any of that. It was just all like fucking like being hit in the face with a brick, and it was like, how do we moderate this? How do we temper this? How do we make it so it's more acceptable? And I think the more that they talked about that, I know Pete was like, oh, like I think one of the things that worried him, which is why he left, was that they wanted more control. Yeah. And, in those days, his favorite example was the Sex Pistols. And there hadn't been the documentary about how manipulative the whole thing was. It was like, it came across as being like, this is real. Whereas there was an element, a small element of the whole Sex Pistols, but the rest of it was just like, it was a built thing. It's like, he picked, it came out in the docky, which the docky was sort of like really, illuminated the whole thing. It was a real eye opener. But I think most people by that stage started to realize, that it wasn't completely an act, but it was a show.
Yeah, putting on a show.
It was a show.
Yeah. Do you ever listen to your old records, or are you sort of, once you do the track, that's it, you just move forward? Because there's a lot of artists I've interviewed, and they don't listen to their old records.
Hardly ever.
You don't listen to your old stuff? Hardly
ever.
Yeah.
The only time, guilty.
Yeah. Is that because you're super critical of, there's something I could have done better, or is that, or just onwards and upwards?
Yeah, but I sort of got over that very, very early in the piece with George and Harry, because there's some tracks that were recorded, like I said, on the first album, the second album, Scarred, Southern Stars. Jesus. I mean, Stuck on You was a jam. It's like, have you got any verses? No. Can you write something? Okay, because the boys were jamming in the studio, and and Stuck on You, like a rose tattoo. Originally, I wanted to write a song. This is going to sound a bit sort of. I wanted to write a song about Mum. I got her into the lyric of Rose of the May, I love you, in the outs, because Mum's name in French, in Creole, was Rose of May, because she was born in May. And her mother said when she was born, she's my little Rose. So they called her Rose of May, which is Rose de May in French. And I wanted to write a song about her, because, I'd most recently moved to Sydney. First time I'd actually been out of the city, out of the same city as growing up with my mum and my brother at that stage. So that was a big move for me, and there was no doubt, and I have no problem addressing this, but I missed her terribly, and I worried about her, even though I knew she was in good company. I mean, she eventually, she married my stepfather, who was an amazing bloke. But having said that, so I wanted to write a song that was just about that, unashamedly about, missing, as a love song. missing someone that you love dearly, not necessarily your mother, but someone. But in my case, it was directed or written about my mother. But anyway, so I had the Rose of the May, I Love You, which I sang along to this thing that they were just jamming of, and then I hear this voice, you know, George in the panel room. He said, "Come in, come in, come in." And so I go in there, and he says, "I got that because Harry and George recorded everything. They had a rule: every time someone played something or someone, you know, you press record because you can always erase it. But if something happens and you go, oh fuck, that was great, and you don't have it, you don't have it." So that was there. But yeah, getting back to the vibe thing. I learned very early in the piece that you could always do something better, but can you replicate that vibe, that moment, that beauty? Like Butcher was done in like less than half a dozen takes, and we ended up using one of the early vocally. Ended up using one of the early takes anyway, you know, and it was late at night, you know, and I'd had a couple of drinks and. It was, you know, because to me it's sort of, it's so dramatic, you know. It's kind of like I just when I listened to it, and I was about to say, you know, the only time that I actually listened to the old stuff, as if we're going to introduce a song we haven't done for a while back into the set, I'll just check the lyric, the arrangement. But, you know, picking out Buster, when I listen to Buster now, it's kind of like, oh, fuck, he's such a drama queen. But it's to me, it's kind of like, it's just exaggerated but when I've questioned that with people, fans, if you like in interview sort of situation, they go, yeah, but that's the intensity of it, and that's what George loved about it, that it is sort of larger than life, if you like. I mean, it's a bit dramatic, don't you think? Like the vocal is like some of the way I tail off some of the words and punctuate and stuff's like, oh fuck, you know, really. But
yeah, well, I'm biased. I wouldn't change a thing.
God bless. But
I wouldn't change a thing like that.
See, that's what George said. You know, like he said, it's the performance. He said it's so intense. But
Absolutely.
getting back to the Stuck on You, there's a couple of tracks. There was always a couple of tracks. They usually ended up on B-sides and stuff where I wasn't going for a final cut. But the jam, if you like, or putting the song together, playing through it a couple of times was such a good vibe that he kept those, as opposed to working it. And like I said, you know, polishing all the rough edges off it, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Angry, this has been another mega fantastic.
Mega's right.
Sorry to keep you, because I could talk to you all day. You've got so many stories. I think let's just tie it in with what's happening now. You've got a great band. I interviewed Ronnie Simmons a couple of months ago. He's a good lad. He looks up to you so much, and
well, I look up to him too.
He tells me he's living the dream playing in your band.
I live up to, it's our band, but just it's all about the gang. It's all about, you know, it's who we are at that one given time, and we are Ronnie and Mick Arnold. He's a fucking extraordinary good player, and we've got Stephen King back in the band playing bass now. Mark had to take a break while he got his surgery looked after, and it was good timing to shift Stephen back in, because I wanted to give Stephen a run before it was all over, because he was such an integral part of the band for a few years. And in the same way that I want to bring Geordie Leach back, and Rob Riley. Hopefully we'll do some songs. as we are with this lineup. Having Paul DeMarco back on drums is like a blessing.
Yeah.
It's it's just one of those things that if you put your faith in the magic, if you like, for want of a better word, although I can't think of a better word, but things have a way of working out, and coming together and falling in place. And I think in these last moments, it's like, okay, it brings it back to the new single, which will be out soon. It's a cover, yet again, another cover of Stevie Wright's song, which is a song I've always wanted to cover of Stevie's, as we did with Bruiser. I always thought that it would make like a tough Wright song. Stephen King came up with that originally from a conversation. He said, he came to recording with an arrangement. But we've done Hard Road, and
nice.
It's fucking monstrous because it's like the Tatts, full-blown Tatts, playing, like Stevie was great at that sort of rock ballad sort of, genre. So we've just made it like the same thing that we did with Bruiser, just 100% tough, like fucking bang. That's what we've done with Hard Road, because it's poetically fits in with what we're doing now, because the road that we've traveled, we're nearly 50 years old. The road is behind us now, and those first naive steps we took as a rock band, like, we're going to go out and we're going to conquer the world, we will change the face of music, whatever motivation you may have had. You're young, you're naive, you're romantically driven, you've got the stars in your eyes, so to speak. I mean those stars, not stardom. You're out to make your mark, and hopefully you can, at the end of the road, you can say that. So, and the end of the road is very close now for us. It's only 2 years away.
Will you be doing a world tour? We've got a lot of fans.
Next year, we're going back to America.
Great.
What may come of it, we don't know. What may come of it is a club run at a later date. But next year, we're just doing a few nights at the Whiskey, and then we go on the Monsters of Rock cruise out of Florida through the Caribbean. And then 26, we're doing Europe again. So we'll do as many festivals as we can, the Wacken and all that sort of stuff. We'll do some of the bigger clubs that we usually do. Because, unless someone comes up with a lot of money and a real good reason, like to pay all the bills, the end of 26, which will be New Year's Eve, 26 into 27. So we'll go on stage in the 26. We'll come off at hopefully at midnight, and that's, as they say, that's the fat lady sung, and that's it. It's all over.
Now, I did last time, you did reveal to me somewhere in Sydney, but you haven't told me the location. But it's in Sydney, is it?
Yeah, it was a toss-up. Well, see, the thing about it was, I said, where are we going to have the absolute last gig? Well, it'd be terrific to do it at Checkers, but that's no longer a possibility. So we thought of the Cross, and then we thought, well, no, because that's past. It's all the past.
Yeah, I don't think there's many venues left there anymore.
No, but there's a few in Sydney which have been important in our history. So yeah, it'll be New Year's Eve, and hopefully we can come off like a few minutes before, or even go right up to. I don't know if they want to stop just to sing Old Lang Syne or whatever, but it depends on the venue and etc. But yeah, so that's kind of that's a very sobering thing because it's the reality is set in that like I've been in the band or been the singer of the band for more than half my life. So 50 years is a big chunk more than of half. You know what I mean?
I'm sure there'll be a few tears shed, both yourself, the band, and the audience, because it's been a fabric of a lot of folks' lives.
Well, yeah. Thank you. I do hope that that's the case. I mean, I do hope because when I say that, I don't mean that in a grandiose, self-congratulatory way, but I just I know that the faithful, and even some of the younger new audience that we now have.
Yep.
One of the things it's a bit trite to say humbled me, but that's the appropriate word. But one of the things that I've found with a lot of the younger people is their passion is for the band and for its music and for what it's done. And like they listen to the lyrics, they want to engage in some cases. Like, I think this is what this means, or did you mean by this? And they'll pull a line out of a song or two lines out of the song, and you find yourself talking about. I go, well, yeah. That when I first wrote that lyric, that's what I was trying to say. That's what I was trying to promote that thought in you. So that's very gratifying. But I mean, philosophically speaking, the wonderful philosophy and the truth that all things must pass. I mean, everything has its own life and its own lifespan, and life itself. I mean, our lives. I am determined to have that last because I mean I've already planned years ago what I would like to do musically after Rose Tattoo. So I've set those wheels in motion. So there will be other musical adventures, and ventures that I'll be doing for a few years after. Because I mean, you got to. It's no secret. I mean, by the time the band finishes, I'll be so close to 80. It'd be fucking a heartbeat or two away. You got to sort of basically. I don't think it's over, but I mean the Tatts. I mean, I hope they're right. These new fans, friends. I hope they're right that they still, even though they weren't there at the beginning, they get a sense that they were from the performances. I mean, let's face it, it's nowhere near as out of control as it used to be.
Yeah, different times.
But there's an intensity and a passion. Going back to young Ronnie, his After Rose Tattoo project has kicked off really well.
Yes.
And he's got a really bright future. I'm not too sure whether he'll go back to Los Angeles, but he certainly has a huge following there, and he has a reputation as a guitar player, which I still think, even though he's made a fist of being a front man, his forte. I said, mate, if you're going to front a band, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't play guitar. Do the two things at the same time. But I think he's, I think he's done the right thing in so much as he's put himself. taken the guitar off and put himself behind the mic, because it shows another dimension of him. It shows another, how he's broadening. But yeah. So I kind of. It's a sobering moment. We kind of we skirt around about like, well, when it's all over. But I think it's starting to set in with us in the band, and those immediates around us. That we are definitely in the last days.
Well,
it's been a hard road.
It has been a hard road. So, folks, when Angry
so
and the lads put out The Hard Road, check it out. Angry, you're an absolute pleasure to interview, and I'd love the opportunity next year to check in and just see how things are going. Because look, as I said, I could talk to you for hours. It actually has been. Sorry,
we
mate.
Actually do. It's kind of like, yeah, mate. Because the thing about it is that there's, and I mean, this is our main connection, but we touch from time to time, don't we, on other matters, and there are other matters. I'm going to start writing much more for, like, my kids and close friends want me to do a podcast. I've considered that, but I'm going to start writing more articles for. I've got a blog thing, and I've been writing for years for different publications. We're going to republish all those. There's the book coming out next year, and a new musical project, which on a much smaller level, but going back to my early days, the blues roots, and it's there's a couple of things that are coming up, I think, that we could talk about, because, like, going back to the book, and also things that I want to write. I want to write about socially, about the political situation, but what concerns me greatly, and you know this better than most, that is the way that I view what is happening to us socially. I mean, there's a real negativity attached to the social engineering aspect of what's happened over the last 12, 15 years, particularly, which has a very sinister, it's now starting to reveal itself. So it's not that I was ever cowardly about it, because, but, there's a right time. And I think, when people are open to the suggestion that all is not as it seems, there's a propaganda machine, there's a great negativity. There's an insidious plot plan behind where they're pushing us. They no longer suggest, they now demand. And that's a very, very, strange and a very worrisome. It's a dangerous thing that's starting to invade our everyday life. And so I think, I've always tried to write these things into songs, and I think now it's time that I took that a step further, and basically, and if they throw rocks at me, so what? But anyway, long story short, what I'm saying is, yes, there's plenty stuff.
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to your book coming out, and as I said, let's catch up next year and check in with Tatts and what they're doing. So once again, Angry, it's an absolute pleasure and all the best, mate.
Thank you, brother.
Cheers.
No wuckers.